We're going to continue with learning theory. There's a lot of information in here, so I'm trying to break it up a little bit. But I just want to review a couple of things because I know this is a little difficult concept for most people to understand. So again, there's three types of learning. The first type we talked about is classical conditioning. And classical conditioning basically means learning by association. You learn to associate two things together so that when one happens, you anticipate the other is going to happen. Okay, that's the basics of classical conditioning, and we went over this in more detail in the last lecture. You need to know the terms unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus, and conditioned response. Remember, unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response are things that automatically happen. There's no learning here. When this stimulus is given, this response automatically occurs. Again, like a reflex. So if I put a puff of air in your eyes, you're going to blink. Blinking is the response. The puff of air is the stimulus. Okay? Then we have the conditioned stimulus and the conditioned response. The conditioned part is the learned part. Okay? This is what's learned. What you learn is that when the conditioned stimulus is given, then the conditioned response occurs. Okay, so again, we went over all of this in detail. I just want to, kind of briefly go over it again, make sure that you understand all of these terms. Okay, then we have the second type, which is classical conditioning. Operant conditioning. Okay, operant conditioning is learning from your consequences. You do a behavior, so the behavior comes first, not like over here where you do the stimulus first and then the response or the behavior. So over here with operant conditioning, you do a behavior, and then that behavior, the consequences of that behavior is either reinforcement or punishment. And remember, reinforcement means always increased behavior. Punishment always means decreased behavior. So if someone does a behavior that you want to continue, you reinforce it. If somebody does a behavior you want to stop, you punish it. Okay? And then we went into detail about positive and negative punishment and positive and negative reinforcement. They're both the same. Remember, positive means to add, negative means to subtract, both for reinforcement and for punishment. Okay? So the first two types of learning, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Now, we didn't quite finish with operant conditioning. Another part of operant conditioning is called schedules of reinforcement. If I had two cigarette lighters, and the cigarette lighter A, every time I hit it, it lit up, no problem. So every time I do the behavior, hit the cigarette lighter, it lights up, it reinforces me. It gives me, a stimulus. Okay, so there we go. Now, cigarette lighter B, I have to hit it maybe 5, 6 times, and then finally it lights up. So it doesn't give me the reinforcement right away. I don't get, what I'm looking for. What I want is for the flame to occur. Okay, but it doesn't give it to me right away. Now, if you think about it, which of these two lighters, lighter A or lighter B, gets more behavior out of me? Lighter B, right? I'm hitting it 5 and 6 times. This one I'm only hitting once. Okay, so this one, lighter B, that does not reinforce me every single time I hit it, doesn't give me the flame every time, doesn't reinforce me every time, I get more behavior. Now, let's say that both of these lighters go out at the exact same time. They both stop working. I don't know this, though. So I hit lighter A, it doesn't light up. I think, So maybe I hit it again and again, maybe 3, 4, maybe even 5 times. And then I stop and I toss it, figuring it's not working. Lighter B, I'm going to hit it 5 times before I even expect it to light. So I hit it 4 or 5 times and it still doesn't light up. I'm going to hit it maybe 5 more times before I toss it out. So this lighter only got 5 behaviors from me. This one got 10 or more. So again, not reinforcing every single behavior gets more behavior. So they came up with what are called schedules of reinforcement. There's 4 of them, but they're based on 2 premises. One is called interval. And interval equals time. So you need to remember interval equals time. And then we have ratio. Ratio equals behavior. That was a little odd. Let me. So if you can remember that interval equals time and ratio equals behavior, then you'll understand these schedules of reinforcement a little bit better. So we have fixed and varied. So with interval, we have a fixed interval and a variable interval schedule. Fixed, of course, means it happens the same. Variable means it varies. So we're talking about time. So a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement means that the time the reinforcement comes is fixed. So if I've got a rat in the Skinner cage, and every time it presses the bar, it doesn't matter if it presses the bar, behavior comes out. If 5 seconds pass and a pellet comes out, and 5 seconds pass and a pellet comes out, 5-second pass, a pellet comes out, we have a fixed interval. The time that it gets reinforced, time passing, is fixed. It's the exact same every single time. Has nothing to do with behavior, only time passing. Okay? Variable interval means that the time that passes is varied. So the rat in the Skinner box, 3 seconds pass, it gets a food pellet. 5 seconds pass, it gets a food pellet. 1 second pass, it gets a food pellet. 8 seconds pass, it gets a food pellet. So it's still, because its interval has to do with time passing, not behavior, time, and it's varied. Okay? Now with ratio, we have the same, fixed and varied. Okay, so we have fixed ratio has to do with behavior. Okay, so the rat in the Skinner cage has to press the bar 3 times and then a food pellet comes out. 3 times a food pellet comes out. 3 times a food pellet comes out. So they get reinforced based on their behavior. Pressing the bar is the behavior, and it's fixed. So it's exactly the same every single time. That's a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. And the fourth one is a variable ratio. So the behavior varies. Okay, so the rat presses the bar 3 times, it gets a food pellet. Then 6 times it gets a food pellet. Then 1 time it gets a food pellet. Then 10 times it gets a food pellet. So the behavior occurs, and it never knows when the reinforcement's coming because it's varied. So we have these 4 schedules of reinforcement: fixed interval, variable interval, fixed ratio, and variable ratio schedules of reinforcement. Remember, interval is based on time and ratio is based on behavior. So if you get paid every Friday you get paid, which schedule of reinforcement are you on? Think about it. Okay. Is your reinforcement, your paycheck is your reinforcement, is it based on time or behavior? It's based on time. Okay. You don't have to do anything. You get a paycheck on Friday. Okay. Is it fixed time or variable time? It's every single Friday. So it's fixed. Okay. So you have a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement if you get paid every Friday, or, if it's always the same time. Okay. If you are a seamstress and you get paid for every 3rd shirt you sew, what schedule of reinforcement are you on? Okay. Is your reinforcement, your paycheck, based on time or behavior? It's based on behavior because you have to sew the shirts before you get paid. Okay. And it's fixed because it's always the exact same. Okay. Which schedule of reinforcement are slot machines? You know what a slot machine is, right? You push the button, pull the lever. There's a behavior, and you get paid out. The payment is the reinforcement, right? So, is a slot machine based on time or behavior? Is it fixed or varied? Interval, fixed or varied ratio? Think about it. It's not time, it has to be behavior because you can't just be sitting there not doing any behavior and the money's going to come, right? You have to do a behavior, either pull the lever or push the button. That's a behavior. So it's ratio. Is it fixed or varied? Does it come, every third time you push the button, or do you never know when it's coming? So it's varied. Okay. So it's a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. And of these 4 schedules of reinforcement, which one do you think gets the most behavior? The most behavior out of a person? Variable ratio. That's why slot machines are set on that way, because you're going to keep pushing that button or pulling that lever because you never know. It's varied when that behavior is going to pay off and give you the reinforcement. You never know when the payment is coming. So you keep thinking the next time, the next behavior, the next behavior, the next push of the button, I'm going to get the big payoff. Okay. So it gets the most behavior out of you is the varied ratio schedule of reinforcement. Okay. So there we go. So that finishes operant conditioning. Okay. The next time, so remember we have 3 types of learning. We have classical conditioning, operant, and now we have social learning, sometimes called observational learning. So it's observational learning, sometimes called social learning, because what it is you observe somebody else and then you imitate their behavior. So that's why sometimes observational, because you have to observe the behavior, and sometimes called social because it's a social thing. It happens in social settings, what we do. And simply we, again, observe what somebody's doing and then we imitate their behavior. The person that we're observing is often called the model, and then we're, the person who's learning the behavior. Okay. So with observational learning, a couple of things have to happen. One, you have to pay attention to the learning, the person, what they're doing. You have to, be focused on what they're doing. You can't, somebody can be doing something over here, but if I'm paying attention over here, I can't learn what they're doing if I'm not paying attention to it. Okay. The other thing that needs to happen for this to occur is we need to be able to do the behavior. Okay. So in other words, I could watch women's basketball. I'm not very tall, only 5'2", and I could watch basketball players for hours and hours and hours and observe their behavior and really focus on what they're doing. It doesn't mean I'm ever going to be able to play as well as they do. I don't have the skills. I'm not tall. I don't have, all of the abilities that they have, no matter how much I do it. I will maybe pick up some things and be able to play, but not to the same degree that they can play. Okay, so observational learning. If the model gets reinforced for their behavior, remember reinforcement is, right? So they do the behavior, we're watching them do the behavior, they get reinforced for that behavior, we want to do the behavior as well, if we want that same reinforcement. So if we see somebody do something and they get a reward for it, a reinforcement for it, they get something, they get some candy, and we like candy, so we want to do that behavior in hopes that we'll get the candy too. Okay, so reinforcing the model also makes it more likely we will learn the behavior. Now, observational learning and social learning often occur in social settings, especially in a new setting. If you are let's say the first day you came to college, and some of you haven't had that experience yet, but if you have, you've had that first day. So you come to college and you sit in your chair, you find the classroom and you sit down, and you see there's, nobody's assigning your seat or anything. People are already in the classroom, so you come in and sit down as well. Now you've been through, school for 12 years already, 13 years if you count kinder. And so you know that if you want to ask a question, you need to raise your hand. If you come in late, the teacher may send you to the principal's office or wherever to get a note for why you're late. You can't eat in the classroom. You can't get up and leave without permission. Everything, there's lots of rules. So you come to college and you don't know anything except what you've learned in school already. So in a school setting, you come in, you see other students are sitting down, so you follow their lead, you go in, you sit down. The teacher comes in, they start talking. Students are coming in late. The teacher's not sending them to the principal. They're not sending them out. They may not even be asking them why they're late. They're just coming in and sitting down. Their students are, maybe eating in the classroom or drinking in the classroom. Somebody gets up and leaves, and the teacher doesn't say anything. It's like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? This is different from what I'm used to. So you just observe what's going on. Then the next day you come to class, maybe you do the same thing. Maybe you come late because the teacher didn't say anything to anybody. You maybe bring your snacks because other students have been bringing snacks. You get up and leave because you have to, go to the bathroom, or you get a phone call and you leave and the teacher doesn't say anything. So it doesn't take long sometimes for observational or social learning to occur. And we all experience it. Again, usually the most likelihood that it's going to occur is in a new setting. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, so to speak. So we kind of follow what other people do to learn how to act in that social setting if it's new to us. Okay, and the biggest thing with observational learning, the most research that's been done in this area is on TV violence and video game violence. And so observational learning states that if we watch violence, we're going to imitate violence, and that children will do the same. So we don't, many studies have shown this, where children will imitate the behavior. If they see violence on TV, they're more likely to see it, or in video games, they're more likely to do it themselves in their own home. There's been study after study after study to do this. When I was in grad school, we did a study with preschool kids, so 4 or 5 years old. In one group, the experimental group got the Power Rangers, and the control group got Barney. And they all watched the video. Then we sent them out to the playground to play. And who do you think was more violent in their play? The group that got the Power Rangers. And the group that got Barney were not as, when we expected to find this, because, again, this study's been done over and over and over and over again. And one interesting study was done in Canada. It was done in the early 1980s. So it's been a while. They found a town in Canada that had no TV broadcast. So they never had TV. Nobody in the town had ever had TV. There was no TV. It had never been to the town. And they found out that TV was coming to the town. So they took this opportunity to go in and do assessments on the children and adults. What's their reading level, their creativity, the aggression in the town. Measured all these things, and then 2 years after TV came, they went back in to see, were there any changes? Did anything happen? Did TV make any impact whatsoever on this town after they had had TV for 2 years? And what they found is that the children's reading levels decline, their creativity declined, both verbal and physical aggression increased, and not only for children, but for adults as well. So again, it's just more proof that observational learning, social learning does occur, and it can affect our behavior in a negative way. It can also affect our behavior in a positive way. So if we show, if you want your kids to say please and thank you, then you need to say please and thank you, because they are going to learn from you and watching you. Okay. So that concludes everything on the 3 types of learning: classical conditioning, which is learning by association; operant conditioning, which is learning by from the consequences of your behavior; and observational learning, which is learning by observing and imitating other people.